Welcome to the second part of Protocol Insecurities lecture. So this time we're going to talk about one of my favorite protocols you might have noticed from your midterm, DNS. DNS in the real world, as you may remember from the question that you've had, is a protocol that is quite hierarchical. There may be some caching of IP addresses and the corresponding host names in your local host. So there's a host file that could cache some of these IP addresses. But if the host file does not include these IP addresses, you usually go to your local DNS resolver. And ISPs approve and provide DNS servers that you are heading afterwards in order to get your URL resolved to an IP address and be able to browse the internet. DNS works over UDP. There is no reason to establish three-way handshakes. It's not efficient, and DNS needs very little information. All it needs is to correspond a URL to an IP address. So it's not worth doing three-way handshakes for something like that. Furthermore, there's only a single packet that is needed for DNS. And in case you were wondering, a URL like google.com does not correspond to only one IP, but a bunch of IP addresses for the thousands of servers that Google has on the net. And so also this helps DNS to do what we call load balancing. Distribute the load. Oh, I just used this IP address for google.com last time. Now I'm going to use the next address in my logs. So now that we remembered how DNS works, let's talk a little bit about its weaknesses. DNS requests and responses are not authenticated. We don't know where we're getting these responses from. We just trust, which is a very interesting thing for such an important service not to authenticate where we get our responses. And therefore, there could be spoofing of DNS. There could be some adversary that pretends to have a legitimate DNS server. So sometimes you may even see that there's IP addresses going around saying, oh, use this IP address as your DNS server. Put this in your network settings. Actually, I customize my DNS server so that I have faster service. But you cannot trust anyone. You need to verify that this IP address belongs to a legitimate DNS server and not to an adversary that is trying to route your traffic to them and eventually routing you to their servers. So that's why spoofing DNS is very, very dangerous, because somebody may pretend to be your bank, spoof the DNS URL of your bank, like let's say wellsfargo.com, make an exact same website, spoof the DNS resolution to point you to that website, and then they own you. They own your information. You'll be typing your username, password. This is not good. So also caching doesn't help because caches can be polluted. So even though you're going to say, oh, we save DNS resolution and we save it in those caches in those logs, they change and they can be polluted. So DNS is a quite insecure protocol. It's been quite ignored, and there's a lot of exploits in the wild. We're not getting into more details on how exactly this happened. We just gave now the big picture. There's an attack that I give again to my graduate class to study. It's called the Kaminsky attack, Dan Kaminsky, and there's some additional slides in your slide deck if you want to get that information, but happy you, it's not going to be included in your midterm. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about this vulnerability is how can we do better? Authenticate our DNS servers, and now there's a new protocol that is coming into play, and it's called DNSSEC, and it's based on authenticating and making sure that the DNS servers are the ones we should trust and not adversarial DNS servers. Again, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to really understand how something works, to find its weaknesses and then correct them. We just talked about DNS. Now we're moving on to, again, TCP, that three-way handshake that we all love because it guarantees our data being transferred appropriately with proper order and with reliability. And now we can also use this protocol to scan and do reconnaissance and find open services and find ways of hurting and being adversarial. So one of the tools that we're going to use in our last lab, a penetration testing lab, is called Nmap. And Nmap is a tool that is doing scanning. It scans for ports. So we are on TCP and also we're on the TCP protocol. We're scanning for ports. And you may wonder, why do I scan for open ports in a machine? So why would I scan Dr. X's computer for open ports? Well, because these open ports may be an open door for you to get access to my computer and change your grades. Never gonna happen. So anyhow, never say never, but ports are important because these are services that could be legitimate, like SSH services that we use to log into Genie and do our experimentation. HTTP service that we use to get access to a web server and get their content and all that. But for an adversary, open ports mean open doors that they can take advantage of and get a footprint into somebody's network, and through that to all their information and all they need. So port scanning is based on different things. One of the types of port scanning can use the three-way handshake. So we send a SIM message to port 22. So as you know, port 22 is transport layer. The IP, of course, address belongs to the network layer. We send a SIM to the port 22, and if the computer says, sure, SYNAC, then we know that port 22 is open and SSH is running on this computer. And of course, as a scanner, we don't want to establish connection yet because we may want to cover our tracks. So we say reset, forget it. We don't want to connect anymore. A similar scan could involve another port, but then the computer may respond, reset, sorry, the port is closed. So this way we can find open and closed ports so that we don't waste our time as adversaries. But don't think for a second that only adversaries use this scanning. Also, good guys use this scanning to see if they have something unnecessary running and defend it. So there you go. Bad things can be used also for good purposes. So definitely I suggest to look into the tool Nmap, and I will post some additional videos before our lab so that you can learn more how to use it. A little more understanding about port scanning, because when we use a tool, we want to understand it to the fullest also. The SYN request could result into no response, no reset, no acknowledgement. So the port scanner may keep asking until it times out, or it asks past a threshold of iterations, and then it has an inconclusive result. It cannot say whether the port is open, it would have gotten an ACK, but it can also not say with certainty that the port is closed because it would have gotten a reset. Finally, a last thing that could be done is that you just establish a connection when you see that the port is open, as it's happening in the lower part of this slide. Okay, so we talked already about a super useful tool, the ping tool that checks if a host is alive, and it's used by administrators to check if something is connected to the internet, and that operates with the layer 3 protocol ICMP. And we have talked about the usefulness, but we haven't talked about how we can pervert, again, this very useful ICMP protocol. So ICMP is a layer 3 protocol, but there's no handshake. So messages are very easy to spoof because who cares where the response goes, right? So you can spoof the IP address. So it could also enable the attacker to remotely reset a connection. It can be used for scanning. So you may see port scanners using ping to check if a host is up. And also it can be used for amplification attacks, such as the ping of death that I'm going to be talking in the next couple of slides. There is a pretty easy solution, though. Most enterprise networks and even home networks, like I do this in my home network, do not allow ping. So I don't allow anybody to ping my home network, of course. Also, somebody could try to verify the sources, and because ICMP can be very useful in the enterprise network. So if the source is whitelisted, then we're good to go. It's an administrator trying to check whether hosts are up and running. We've discussed about maximum transfer unit and that it's been decided that it's going to be set to 1500 bytes. However, there is no MTU police to enforce this type of size for our transfer unit. Therefore, there's another little detail of a protocol that has been used in a way of weakening our systems and crashing our networks. The ping of death is a denial of service attack, where an oversized ICMP packet can trigger crashes of routers and servers, or rebooting, blue screen of death, and all of this havoc. And there's not much we can do except maybe disallow ping or have some safety, some exception when a maximum transfer unit is too large to exit gracefully. ARP spoofing. Hopefully by now you have watched the layer 2 video, so you understand the address resolution protocol. The address resolution protocol is very noisy. You may have seen it when you are sniffing wireless networks. You see these ARP requests that say who has this IP address, and somebody replies with their MAC address. The ARP protocol is super chatty. Sometimes it's gratuitous also. It says, so my laptop may say, here's my MAC address that corresponds to this IP address, and things like that. So the problem with that is that your switch or router, or whatever you have, your home router works as a switch as well. You may see tables with ARP, with MAC addresses corresponding to an IP address. It's keeping track of these things in a table, MAC address of Dr. X's computer, IP address of Dr. X's computer. But if somebody goes out and says, oh, this IP address, I have it, and here's my MAC, the switch trusts that, the switch or router, and substitutes my MAC address with your MAC address. And now my switch is sending, the switch is sending my communication to you. So this is ARP spoofing and / ARP poisoning. So you poisoned the ARP table so that you can perform a man-in-the-middle attack. It can happen very nicely with wireless networks, and there is even a lab on Genie that can be done with wireless and perform this ARP spoofing. I also recommend that you experiment a little bit at home. Don't break your internet, but try to experiment, because you could even achieve this with your home router, and you have permission to do that because it's your home router, so you are allowed to do this to your own equipment if you want to. The defense for ARP spoofing is smarter switches and avoid trust relationships. So try to authenticate and using encrypted protocols and packet filtering. So there are differences. It's also a little less impact type of attack because you have to already be in the local network. But if you are, like you have already gotten credentials from somebody and you are already in the local network, you can very much easily do an ARP spoofing attack as well. So these differences are very essential. Switches also may assign a host to a specific port and hard code it, and then you can't fake that you have that IP and correspond your MAC address to that.